But let's start off by taking a look at politics. Where do the Conservatives stand? Where does Labour stand? Who is likely to win the next election? Here's our special analysis.
Who is likely to win the next elections in the United Kingdom? Before we answer that for you, let's look at when the next election is due. No later than 28th of January 2025. That's according to the rule book. The one is that UK will go to the polls in late 2024. Running for office will be the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, and maybe an independent candidate or two. But the race will be mainly between the Labour and the Conservative. The Conservatives are currently in power. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will be leading them to the polls. Will he be able to deliver a positive result? Recently, Britain held local elections. The Conservatives lost about 1,000 council seats. It's a worrying sign in the lead up to the elections. The Labour Party was quick to brand it as a clear rejection of Rishi Sunak. Labour leader Keir Starmer declared that his party was on course to win the next general election. But it is not that simple. Both parties have their plus and minuses. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, for example, is facing a unique problem. Voters are not able to relate to him or his helicopter rides as they struggle to make their ends meet amid the cost of living crisis. Then there is Rishi Sunak's wife, Akshata Murthy's business interest. The Sunak government has been accused of favouring a business that Murthy is invested in. Sunak is now being investigated for potential conflict of interest. The state of Britain's economy isn't favouring the Conservatives either. Inflation is at a 4-decade high. While it may not be of the Conservatives' making, it will be them paying the price for it.
From Westminster to the British people.
What about the Labour Party? Is everything really working in their favour? The Conservatives have been in government for 13 years. So the anti-incumbency will be working in favour of the Labour Party. There are analysts who believe that while Labour Party could be the largest party in the next parliament, they may not have the kind of numbers the party would like. According to one estimate, if elections were to be held now, Labour Party would get 44% of the vote and Conservatives would get 28%. Electoral calculus suggests that Labour would get anywhere between 294 and 417 seats in the 650-member House. A YouGov poll suggested that 31% of UK adults believe that Keir Starmer is doing a good job as a Labour leader. 49% say he is doing badly. What about Rishi Sunak? 51% of the public, according to YouGov, believe Sunak is doing badly as Prime Minister. 31% think he's doing well. When Sunak was asked what he feels would happen in the coming polls, he said, and I'm quoting him, "I'm not detecting any massive group swell of movement towards the Labour Party."
Well, joining us now to tell us exactly who's going to win the election in 2024 and by how many seats, Nigel Fletcher, from political historian at the King's College here in London. Thank you so much, Nigel, for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
You do know exactly, right? Who's winning the election?
Well, one thing I know from political history is that you should never make predictions. And I think even if it looks now as though we can predict the number of seats at the next general election, I think you'd be a fool to put money on it at this point. Things can change, and one of the things that...
But the Conservatives seem to be doing badly. I mean, that is fair to say, right? That for the moment, they look as if they are on their way out.
I think that's fair to say, but on the other hand, William Hague, one of the former leaders of the Conservative Party, wrote an article this week in which he said that local elections are not always the best guide to a general election. When he was leader of the Conservatives, they were doing very badly indeed, and did do very badly at the general election in 2001. But a year before that, they did pretty well at the local elections. So I think you have to be a bit careful about it, but I think certainly it's not looking great for the Conservatives at the moment.
What are the main problems? Why are people unhappy? Is it because of the cost of living crisis? Is it because of the economy? What underlines this?
Well, I think there's a number of things going on. As you say, the cost of living crisis is a huge thing. We've seen levels of inflation that most people in this country will not remember having seen.
It's what, 19%, right?
We're looking at sort of periods of the year when we've seen huge figures like that, and that's not something people have been used to. So you're seeing prices going up in the shops, you're seeing people's mortgages costing more as well, with interest rates having gone up, and all sorts of things that are squeezing household incomes, and that doesn't do well for the government. But at the same time, you've also got a government that's been in office now for 13 years, and I think any government that's been in office for that length of time, they do degrade over time. Their popularity declines, and you have what political scientists call costs of governing, that people's attitude towards the government inevitably declines over that time. So you've got a number of things going on there, and of course, you know, you've got a Prime Minister who's been in office for a very short amount of time, but after a fairly turbulent period in British political history.
So, you know, when you're looking at that period, people say that, you know, the Conservatives actually hit rock bottom with that rather chaotic 49 days of Liz Truss.
Yes.
Has Rishi Sunak been able to pull it back or not enough? Or is he personally somewhat popular but not enough to help the Conservatives? How would you rate him?
Well, I think that he's stabilised the Conservative Party and the government for the period that he's been in office, but that's not really saying very much. As you say, the period, both through Boris Johnson's latter months in office and then into Liz Truss's very brief premiership, it was a period of enormous turmoil, which did huge damage to the Conservative brand. And we saw with the polls, they fell off a cliff during that period, and they haven't really recovered to the levels they were even in the last days of Boris Johnson. So it has been a very damaging period of time. And I think what we're seeing is that whatever people's view of Rishi Sunak as a person, the brand of the Conservative Party is what's really dragging him down.
So when you're looking at who's going to benefit from this, Conservatives took a real beating. And a horrible beating in the local elections. You're right; it's not necessarily an indicator for the general election, but it's a pointer as to the way things are going. So they took a real beating, but all the benefits didn't go to Labour. The Liberal Democrats picked up a lot of seats. The Greens did reasonably well.
Yes.
Is that something you think could happen in the general election? That it goes, maybe the Liberal Democrats come up more than people think they're going to?
Yes, I think that some Conservatives are hanging on to that as being sort of some false comfort that the Labour Party didn't benefit exclusively. I think anything that sees the Conservatives doing less well and other opposition parties doing well is bad for the government, it's bad for the Conservative Party. And I think what's a danger for them is if people start voting in a way where they pick whoever is going to defeat the Conservatives. That's what we've seen in previous elections, most notably in 1997 when the Conservatives went down to a huge landslide defeat. People were voting tactically. They were voting for Liberal Democrats if they were the main challengers. They were voting Labour if they were the main challengers. And I think that's a bit of what we're seeing in the local elections. So where there are other parties that are challenging in those seats, it's very bad for the Conservatives if people are seeing who the main challengers are and voting for them.
All right, Nigel Fletcher, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Pleasure.
you.